What if the company selling you the blueprint suddenly decided to build the house itself and sell it to your customers? That's not a hypothetical. That's exactly what ARM just did. And if you think this only matters to chip engineers in lab coats, you're about to find out why it affects every data center, every cloud service, and eventually every app running on your phone. Let's talk about ARM's AGI CPU announcement, what it really means, and why the smartest players in tech are quietly panicking right now. Before anything else, here's a number that should make you stop scrolling. The global AI data center market is on track to consume over 100 gigawatts of power by 2030. 100 gigawatts. That's roughly the entire electricity output of France. Not for a country. For server farms running artificial intelligence workloads. Inside those power-hungry halls, a war is being fought, not with missiles, but with microchips. And the battlefield just shifted. If you want to understand who wins and who loses, you need to understand ARM. Not just what it does, but what it was, what it refused to be, and what it just chose to become. Here's the confusion most people carry around without knowing it. When someone says ARM chip, they picture a single type of processor. But ARM isn't one chip. ARM is a language. A set of instructions, a design philosophy, a license that other companies pay to speak. Apple speaks it in the M series. Qualcomm speaks it in Snapdragon. Amazon speaks it in Graviton. They all use ARM's instruction set called RISC, which stands for Reduced Instruction Set Computing, but what they build on top of it is completely different. Think of it like this. ARM created the grammar. Everyone else writes their own novels. Some write literary masterpieces with custom silicon designed from scratch. Others use templates. Others just reprint what ARM already designed, with minor edits. The result is a massive, fragmented ecosystem, all speaking the same language, none of them identical. For decades, ARM stayed in its lane. It wrote the grammar. It sold the license. It collected the royalties. Beautiful business model. Enormous margins. Almost no manufacturing cost. Just pure intellectual property, selling for billions. Then ARM looked at the AI revolution, looked at the money on the table, and made a decision that changes everything. Let's put yourself in ARM's position for a second. You license your chip designs to Apple, Amazon, Qualcomm, and dozens of others. Every time they sell a chip, you get a cut. No factories. No supply chain headaches. No yield problems at the fab. Just pure margin. ARM's operating margins have historically sat around 40 to 50%, which in the hardware world is almost absurd. Semiconductor manufacturing companies often fight for margins under 20%. Now imagine watching your customers, the ones paying you licensing fees, become some of the most powerful computing companies in the world. Amazon's Graviton chips now power a significant portion of AWS infrastructure. Apple's M series redefined laptop performance. These companies didn't just use ARM's designs. They mastered them. They optimized them. They built enormous competitive advantages on top of a foundation ARM provided. And ARM watched. And ARM charged licensing fees. And ARM thought, what if we stopped being the grammar teacher and started writing our own bestsellers? That's the AGI CPU announcement. ARM is not just licensing anymore. It is entering the market as a chip vendor itself, targeting AI data centers directly. And it named the product with deliberate clarity, AGI CPU, Artificial General Intelligence. Not some modest, niche product name, a declaration of ambition. Now here's where it gets Machiavellian. ARM's customers are also its competitors now. That's the channel conflict every business analyst was quietly dreading. When the supplier of your core technology enters your market, you face a choice. Keep buying from them, build something entirely your own, or find a new supplier. In semiconductors, none of those options is cheap or fast. Custom CPU design from scratch takes 3 to 5 years minimum. Billions of dollars. Enormous engineering headcount. And there's no guarantee it works the first time. Companies like Apple and Amazon have done it because they had the scale and the patience. Most companies don't. Most companies rely on ARM's pre-built core designs, called off-the-shelf IP, precisely because starting from zero is brutal. The closer you get to building a fully custom chip, the higher your risk, the longer your timeline, and the more money you burn before a single wafer is cut. ARM knows this. ARM has watched every one of its customers navigate this trade-off. And now ARM is using that knowledge to position itself as the fastest, safest path to an AI-ready processor. That's not accidental. That's strategy. Let's talk about who's winning and losing in the current chip ecosystem, because the landscape has already shifted dramatically. Intel, which dominated CPU markets for decades with its x86 architecture, CISC, complex instruction set computing, has been losing ground fast. Not because its chips are suddenly bad, but because the market moved. AI workloads don't care about legacy compatibility as much as they care about performance per watt. ARM's RISC architecture delivers more computation for less energy. In a world constrained by power budgets, that matters enormously. Traditional CPU vendors built their dominance in the era of general-purpose computing. You needed a CPU that could run spreadsheets, browsers, databases, and games equally well. That era produced Intel's stranglehold. But AI data centers don't need that generalist capability. They need CPUs that can orchestrate, coordinate, and manage orchestration layers between GPU clusters. Specialized, lean, efficient. ARM's AGI CPU is designed for exactly that role. It's not trying to beat Intel at running your browser. It's trying to be the nervous system of the next generation of AI infrastructure. Here's where the power budget math becomes unavoidable. A modern AI data center runs on fixed power allocations. A facility rated for 1 gigawatt can't suddenly pull 2 gigawatts because demand spikes. A GPU is a watt unavailable for something else. For years, AI training workloads dominated that power budget. Training a large language model requires enormous GPU clusters running for weeks. In that environment, CPUs were almost an afterthought, supporting cast. Necessary but secondary. Then the industry shifted from training to inference and from inference to agentic AI. Agentic systems are AI that don't just respond to one question. They plan. They decompose tasks. They call tools. They manage workflows. They loop, check, revise, and decide, often hundreds of times per user request. That orchestration work is CPU-heavy, not GPU-heavy. One industry projection suggests that agentic AI workloads could require 10 times more CPU cores than current AI data centers provision. 10 times. If even a fraction of that projection holds, the CPU market for AI infrastructure becomes enormous fast. ARM is betting it will own a significant portion of that market before competitors understand the shift is happening. Now let's look at the financial logic, because the numbers tell a story ARM isn't advertising loudly. ARM's licensing and royalty business carries extraordinary margins. Building and selling physical chips does not. Manufacturing requires partnerships with fabs like TSMC, inventory management, customer support at a hardware level, and the constant pressure of yield rates, meaning how many chips from each wafer actually work correctly. These realities compress margins significantly. ARM has publicly projected that its chip business could generate substantial revenue, potentially billions over the next few years. But the margin profile is different. Where licensing might return 40 cents of profit on every dollar of revenue, chip sales might return 15 to 20 cents. The company is explicitly trading efficiency for volume. It is betting that a larger market with lower margins is worth more than a smaller market with extraordinary margins. That is a bet worth examining carefully. It implies ARM's leadership believes the Agentic AI CPU market is large enough to compensate for the profitability compression. And it implies they believe they can execute on hardware at scale, something they have never done at this level before. The risk is real. The ambition is larger. Zoom out for a moment and look at what the broader competitive landscape now resembles. The old model was simple. Intel and AMD made CPUs. NVIDIA made GPUs, ARM licensed designs, and cloud companies bought hardware from all of them. Clean separation. Clear roles. Now every major hyperscaler, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Meta, designs its own chips. NVIDIA has moved into networking and systems. ARM is entering chip sales. Intel is trying to become a contract manufacturer. The lines have dissolved. What replaced the old model is vertical integration at massive scale. Companies that control their own silicon control their own costs, their own performance roadmaps, and their own competitive destiny. The companies that rely entirely on external chip vendors are increasingly dependent on suppliers whose interests no longer fully align with theirs. This is the villain and victim dynamic playing out in slow motion at industrial scale. The villain isn't evil. ARM isn't doing something unethical. But it is doing something that structurally disadvantages its existing customers. When your grammar teacher starts publishing novels, every novelist who learned from them has to reckon with a new competitor who also happens to control the language they write in. The victim isn't powerless either, but the victim needs to make decisions faster than they're accustomed to. So what does this mean for you practically? If you're building on cloud infrastructure, the processor underneath your workloads is about to matter more than it ever has. Not because you'll choose it directly, but because your cloud vendor will make choices that affect your latency, your cost, and your scalability. Understanding the chip layer helps you ask better questions and make smarter architectural decisions. If you're an enterprise technology strategy, ARM's move is a signal. The era of assuming your suppliers are neutral partners is over. Every foundational vendor in the tech stack is evaluating whether to expand into adjacent markets. That changes how you negotiate. It changes how you build dependencies. It changes your vendor risk assessments. If you're an investor or a market observer, the margin compression ARM is accepting voluntarily is worth watching. Companies that trade profitability for market share either build dominant positions or burn capital without achieving scale. ARM's execution over the next 3 years will answer which story this is. Here's the real philosophical lesson underneath all of this. Control matters more than convenience. The companies that will dominate AI infrastructure in 2030 are the ones making investments today in owning their technology stack, not licensing it, not depending on partners whose interests may diverge. Owning it, that means more capital expenditure, more engineering complexity, more risk, but also more independence. The question every organization needs to ask right now is not which chip should we use? The question is, how much of our technology fate are we willing to hand to someone else? ARM spent 30 years answering that question one way. Licensing, pure IP, maximum margin, minimum risk. Now it's changing its answer. Because it looked at the AI market, looked at the power constraints, looked at the agentic workload trend, and decided that being the supplier of the grammar wasn't enough anymore. It wants to write the story itself. Whether that's visionary or overreaching, the market will decide. But one thing is certain. The CPU war for AI data centers is just beginning, and the rules have already changed. If this kind of analysis is useful to you, subscribe to the channel. Not because of what was covered today, but because the stories underneath the announcements, the strategic logic, the financial trade-offs, the quiet power shifts, that's what this channel exists to unpack. New videos drop regularly. The next one is already in progress. The question isn't whether ARM will succeed. The question is whether its customers will see the move coming in time to respond. Most of them are already behind.